Welcome to Section 2 of Chapter 19, Reaction Revolution. The focus question is, what was the concert of Europe and what forces and events ended it? So the reaction in this section is referring to the reaction against the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. So how does Europe put itself back together after that upheaval? And then the revolution is this wave of revolutions against the reaction against the revolution. So this is a section about what happens when you try to stop change, basically. Concert of Europe refers to the balance of powers agreement set up at the Congress of Vienna after the end of Napoleonic Wars. So 1815 is the Congress of Vienna. You can see the red here, it shows you countries that exist, basically, or new border lines and things like that. The country labeled in black existed before. So there's a whole bunch of new territorial adjustments. Long story short, the German states, the Holy Roman Empire continues to be abolished, but there's a German confederation, the center of Europe, to keep the Germany divided. Italy is kept from becoming its own nation. And this whole thing is based because the Austrian Empire has 23 different nationalities in it, and they don't want to go with the nationalism and liberalism of the French Revolution, because that means the destruction of their empire and the end of their monarchy. And there's lots of other countries in Europe that agree, especially Russia. So the Congress of Vienna took place in 1815, and it's the absolute monarchs of Europe finding themselves in charge again. The foreign minister of Austria is very clever, and he gets the Congress to be held, this peace treaty basically, be held in the capital city of Austria, Vienna. And Clemens von Metternich, he puts out the idea that you need a balance of powers, and that's going to keep the great powers at peace. He is what is called, for the first time in history, a conservative. So this is where the idea of conservatism comes from as far as a political philosophy. It means a belief in social stability and in tradition. This, of course, just like any other ideology, changes over time. And at the time, this meant support for the church and obedience to authority, meaning the monarch. So it's not quite divine right of kings, but it is a belief that religion and the monarchy are absolutely important to preserve. And this kind of balance of powers in Europe is called the Concert of Europe. And basically this beautiful concert where everyone's at peace is held in place by the principle of intervention, meaning that if any country got too nationalistic, meaning too in support of their own nationality, and we'll go into the next slide, or too liberal or too revolutionary, the great powers would invade and crush that revolution and keep the contagion, as they refer to it, of revolutionary thought from spreading. Ideas don't often listen to that sort of force, though. So the two big forces that you're going to think about for the rest of world history, and really, hopefully once you're out of this class as well and living your life, as far as motivating people and countries, are liberalism and nationalism. So this is a image of the various national flags. They've got like a Christ scene in the top. You can see all the tricolors, and it's people marching to their national, basically, fates, their national heritages, their national destinies. So liberalism, though, is the idea that there should be equality behind the law, or equality before the law, freedom of the press, assembly, freedom of religion. There should be constitutional protections for the citizens of each country. But liberalism is not socialism, because ultimately that constitutional protection piece is used by the middle class supporters and upper middle class supporters, those with property, to protect their property. So liberals, generally speaking, do not want revolutionary change, because revolutionary change could mean their property rights end up being violated in their eyes, and they could lose out economically. A socialist might say, well, that property that you have is stolen, and that's an idea we'll get into more as we get into later eras, especially the Russian Revolution. So the nationalists that are a bigger group than the liberals. Nationalism does not find itself limited to the middle classes who are generally educated. Nationalism is the belief, and in often cases it almost has a religious kind of tinge, that communities exist tied by language, kinship, traditions, and the mysterious fate. So the German people's destiny is a phrase you might hear romantically back here in the 1800s, but less romantically once we get to the 1930s. Again, national boundaries are not drawn they're actually the state boundaries are drawn instead of national boundaries. So instead of drawing all the Germans inside of a circle, you have divide and conquer in order to keep different countries powerful. And again, this is really all about Austria, which has 30 different languages. And even though they're, majority of their kind of ruling population speaks German, they oppose a German-speaking state because it means the end of their multinational empire. Because how can you have a Germany when you don't justify saying having a Hungary? So the revolutions of 1848 are some of the most important revolutions that you have never heard of and no one you know has ever heard of. They're basically a couple precursors. There's a revolution for Belgian independence, I believe in 1820 or 1815 or so. I didn't write it down, but it's right after the Congress of Vienna. There are two failures of nationalist revolution in Italy and Poland, and basically they're both crushed by, in Italy's case, the Austrians who control the northeast of the country, French William intervention, and in Poland it's the Russians who crushed this Polish rebellion, actually in the territory of Austria. 1848, this is an image of a new French Revolution. One of those Louis is overthrown, and a second French Republic is established. Initially, you have a socialist element that's part of this revolution, but they're pushed aside with universal manhood suffrage, which is one man, one vote. Women were still not allowed to vote in 1848 France. And they were kind of pushed aside, and basically there was a bunch of workhouses employing people who were unemployed to do work by the state. So it was socialism, state-owned factories. Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Napoleon, it's hilarious also, the most French name ever, Louis Napoleon, is elected, and he gets rid of these socialist elements of the country, and the socialists are obviously quite angry. But this is a liberal nationalist revolution in 1848 in France, which inspires lots of other countries, most importantly Germany. So this flag here, the black, red, gold, is the flag of the German Revolution of 1848 in a modern flag of German state. It represents a change from the 38 independent states of the German Confederation, most of whom are absolutists. Liberal intellectuals, they call it the Professors' Parliament, meet in Frankfurt, Germany. So that's modern-day Germany. It's the city-state of Frankfurt. And they create a Frankfurt Assembly, write a new constitution, but forgot to get a military to enforce their will on the 38 different states. The two biggest ones end up crushing the revolution, but not before the capital of Austria, the capital of Prussia, Berlin, and Vienna, respectively, are captured by revolutionaries. The King of Prussia actually takes one of these, revolutionary flags and puts it around his shoulders, leaves his palace and walks around the crowd, and the crowd proclaims him king of all of Germany. He then goes back in his palace and gets his forces and crushes the revolutionaries in order to keep this liberal revolution from happening, and Prussia waits to have a Germany that doesn't have liberal politics. And again, that's respect for human rights and things like that. Austria, again, the linchpin of the concert of Europe, they are torn apart nearly by the forces of liberalism and nationalism. In particular, the forces of nationalism are really prominent amongst the, there's 30 different languages spoken, but these are kind of the major ones. The city of Vienna, again, the Frankfurt Parliament and the revolutionaries in Germany capture the city of Vienna. The Hungarians are given their own parliament, but nonetheless, there's still a revolution there. The Czechs in Bohemia and Moravia, they end up rising up, and they're crushed by Russian soldiers, basically, who are here to help all the powers of Europe keep their absolutist governments, or at least relatively absolutist governments. So again, all these different ethnicities want to form their own nation states. Italy is also another failure of nationalism in the revolutions of 1848. But again, just like Germany, this sets the stage for 20 years after, when they finally unify into a nation. So there's 9 states. I list them here. Basically, it's hard to get the Pope to give up his land if he thinks that God is on his side. The Southern Kingdom is too powerful to want to unify. And the Austrian-held territories in Lombardy and Venetia, which are some of the richest in all of Italy, they rise up, and they are crushed against Austria, which they finish with the Hungarians with Russian help. And that is that.